Welcome to the Happier and Healthier podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and this is a place where we don't rely on good luck or good genes for our health and happiness, but rather we create it with our thoughts and our actions each and every single day. Each week, I'll bring you a thought or a guest that will help you live your happiest and healthiest life. Are you ready? Welcome back to the Happier and Healthier podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Joel Kahn, a plant-based cardiologist whose personal mission is to prevent 1 million heart attacks over the next 2 years. His brand of cardiology combines the best of Western and complementary therapies for total healing. As a holistic cardiologist, he definitely puts a huge emphasis on diet and how we can use a healthy diet to not only prevent, but to also reverse heart conditions. So I think you'll find this really interesting. We're talking about everything from animal foods to plant-based foods, salt, sugar, grains, legumes, the paleo diet, the vegan diet, and what he ultimately eats in a day as a vegan cardiologist. If you enjoy this episode, while you're listening, you can take a screenshot of the episode on your phone and share it to Instagram stories. If you do that, be sure to tag me at Maria Marlowe, and Marlowe is Marlowe, as I love to see what your favorite episodes are, and I love sharing them on my own Instagram stories as well. This podcast is brought to you by Eat Slim, my 10-week online nutrition and cooking course that will help you improve your digestion, increase your energy, lose weight, and most importantly, improve your health. I started this program about 5 years ago. It was originally an in-person program here in New York, and each session I ran it, more and more people would come. So I eventually turned it into an online course so that anyone can join from anywhere in the world. In addition to looking and feeling better, participants have said that the course has helped them improve their self-confidence, increase their self-love, and feel more confident and comfortable in the kitchen, even if they never stepped foot in it before. So, if you're ready to feel your best, look your best, and become your healthiest self, join us for Eat Slim. Registration is now open for the next class that starts September 7th. Head to mariamarlowe.com/eat-slim to see all the details, see the before and after photos, read the incredible testimonials, and register. I hope to see you in class. Thanks for being here, Dr. Kahn.
My pleasure. Glad to reconnect with you.
Yeah, so I actually had to speak to Dr. Kahn this weekend because my mom, as some of you may have seen, has been having some heart issues, high blood pressure, AFib, and he was very generous with his time and knowledge and sharing how he helps and how he believes we should eat and live for heart health. So you're very well known for being a plant-based cardiologist, 100% vegan. And so did you always eat that way, or what made you change your mind and start eating this way?
Yeah, the thing that I had really just the serendipity is I was vegan before I went to medical school. So my entire medical training since age 18 has been with a plant-based diet for myself and my wife. And then as I continued on in medical studies and realized this wasn't just a personal choice, this was a medical, therapy and a preventive therapy, I got very excited that I had stumbled upon this. So I began practice 1990, getting close to, say, 30 years of seeing people. And right from the get-go, I would tell people to read a book by Dr. Ornish, which was about the only resource, a paperback back then. And then as we came into the next decade, we had the China study and Dr. Esselstyn's book, and ultimately Forks Over Knives video, which made it so simple. But yeah, I'm pretty committed after 40 plus years, a personal choice to never touch an animal on my plate. But seeing such amazing responses that patients can have, it's, and my focus now is more to prevent than wait till you're at the emergency room door and use technology. I mean, that's how I used to do it. I met you in the emergency room. I took care of you. And then I taught you how not to have to need my services again. But now I'm trying to catch you way upstream so you never end up in the emergency room.
Yeah, I wish more people cared about prevention. I think there's a little bit of a shift in sentiment on that, but I think traditionally or societally, we always waited until we had that scary diagnosis or some sort of event happens where then all of a sudden we're willing to look at our diet and lifestyle. But until then, most people are happy eating whatever they want or living however they want.
I agree with you. What they don't realize is it's possible to detect at the earliest stage that that's not working well for them. I mean, years to decades before there's a heart attack, I can tell you your arteries are older than your birth date, and the process is beginning. Now, some people welcome that, some people don't. Some people stay committed to that bright potential to have a healthier life without disability, medication, surgery, and maybe early death. And other people, frankly, YOLO. And we're not just talking 20-year-olds saying YOLO, we're talking 64-year-olds saying YOLO. And they will go for the cheeseburger and the milkshake, even when they find out they got the problem.
Right. Yeah. To each their own, I guess. But I think most people, when faced with their mortality, right, they're going to want to make a change. So, but let's talk about, you mentioned there are some signs that you can see decades before they end up in the emergency room. So what are some of the signs, maybe some of the outward or physical signs they might see or you might see? And then one thing, like with my mom, for example, she hasn't been to a doctor in 25 years. And I feel like if she would have just got a physical every year, we could have maybe caught this sooner. So yeah, what can we see on our own? And then what can you tell us in the doctor's office?
Yeah, and that is part of it. What you just mentioned is, even though I'm going to tell you some really interesting ones, you won't feel a blood pressure that's elevated. You won't know that your blood sugar is elevated. You won't know that your cholesterol is elevated. You have to know the numbers. And you might know your weight and your waist size. That's going to be a little more obvious, which are also important numbers. But you have to get a checkup. Frankly, a lot of this is lab work, and you can send blood off if you don't like your local medical team. I don't own companies called wellnessfx.com or lifeextension.com, but you can order your own lab work. You actually can get better lab work than you would at your family doctor typically. But you still got to check your blood pressure, buy a cuff, go to the drugstore, go to the fire station, know your weight. I mean, you have to know those basics because they really do matter. About 1 in every 250 people have a genetic cholesterol disorder where their cholesterol might be 400. You want to find that out when you're 18, not when you're in an emergency room. And 20% of people have a kind of cholesterol called lipoprotein little a, LP little a, kind of a funny word. And 20% of people, that's 65 million Americans, and it can destroy your arteries. So these are some basics. I've written a lot on the web. If anybody Googles my name and heart attack prevention, you'll find stuff I've written. But then if you want to get into some kinky and interesting physical exam finds, some are kinky actually, so I'll stick with that term. Losing your hair on top of your head early in life, maybe a little bit more commonly male than female, has been scientifically associated. It doesn't prove it. You can lose your hair and have clean arteries. Actually, recently turning prematurely gray, partly gray, fully gray, it kind of makes sense. It is an aging process. It's a loss of youthful pigment cells in the scalp. It's been associated. There's a really neat one called the diagonal earlobe crease. Go look at a picture of Steven Spielberg, the film producer. You'll see a deep line on his earlobe, like he was wearing 5-pound earrings, which of course he doesn't. And 45 years ago, a doctor in New York, Dr. Frank, said, I think my clinic has taught me that that's a reliable sign of silent heart disease. And last 5 years, it's been confirmed with newer and better technology. So I'm like an earlobe aficionado. I might start a magazine called Earlobe Aficionado. And I actually mainly am struggling if I see people I don't know and I see it, do I go up and give them a card or tell them and such? And I've done it at times, and they 70% accuracy. For the guys listening, for the women that have guys that aren't listening, erectile dysfunction, that's back to the kinky comment, that 3-4 years, that's what the science says, before a heart attack, before an emergency room visit, a guy may start to develop difficulties with erections, go to the pharmacy, get one of the drugs, buy an over-the-counter agent. It's bad blood flow, more likely than any other cause of erectile dysfunction. So get checked, know those numbers we talked about, and other ways. And then finally, this is pertinent to the erectile dysfunction comment. So what do I do, Doc? I'm 51 years old and I'm having difficulty, and I don't think it's psychological, emotional, I'm just having difficulty. Well, what's your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your lipoprotein A, and some C-reactive protein. But everybody listening is within an hour drive or less, most likely, of a CAT scan of the heart that's called a coronary artery calcium scan. It costs about $100, used to be $1,000. Takes about 10 seconds, no needles, so you don't have to run away because you're fearful, no iodine, you can't have an allergic reaction. And you get a report from this CAT scan, which is very low radiation, no iodine. And it tells you 0, you really have youthful arteries. It tells you 674, which is just an abstract number, it can go into the thousands. You are aging very rapidly, and you need to figure out why with the most extensive lab panel, dietary panel, fitness panel, stress panel, sleep apnea evaluation. So a lot of guys come to my office with actually a diagonal earlobe crease. That works for women too. Or erectile dysfunction. We order the CAT scan because it usually takes a prescription pad, not everywhere. In the state of Texas, it doesn't. In Indiana, it often doesn't. And anyways, they learn years before the bad news. And then we got to wrap them around. The right diet, the right fitness, the right sleep, the right stress, the right weight, and some supplements and other treatments that might put them at the top gear.
So speaking of the right diet, right lifestyle, can you tell us what are some of the key components? Let's start with the diet. We know it's whole food, plant-based, but give us a little bit more information.
So we can, argue about diet for hours, and I'm very active on Twitter, engaging conversation with some friendly and some less than friendly people. But in the terms of heart disease, the number one killer of men and women starts in your teens, starts in your 20s, starts in your 30s. Somebody like you, Marla, that's in your 20s, it could start, but your lifestyle is great and all that. It actually does start that early if you do the right kind of studies and testing. So we know most about what diet helps prevent that process, and actually more exciting, what diet reverses that process. I mean, that's the exciting concept. That's what fires me up in my clinic in Detroit, my longevity heart clinic, is the idea that I can actually teach people and add to their program. So we learned from, I won't go through the whole history, but literally from the 1940s through, I'll say 1990, a large body of science that heart disease could be prevented and reversed with plant diets. But July 21, 1990, I'd been in practice 3 weeks, and a medical article was published by Dr. Dean Ornish, MD, a internal medicine specialist in San Francisco, still lives there. And he reported that in very sick heart patients, within as little as 3 weeks of getting rid of the standard diet, the meat-based diet, the eggs, the cheese, and adding in a plant diet with the lifestyle of some yoga, some walking, some social support, some love and affection, meditation, you actually could see people get better within 3 to 4 weeks in terms of symptoms and stress test abnormalities. And at 1 year and 5 year, actually document that their arteries were cleaner than they were when they started. And that has gone on to a large body of data now at the Cleveland Clinic with Dr. Esselstyn, in New Jersey with Dr. Joel Furman. Medicare has approved the Ornish and what's known as the Pritikin program of heart disease reversal and prevention using plant diets. So, and there is no other. Medicare didn't approve 10 programs for the reversal of heart disease. They approved 2, and they're both plant-based. There is no data. There isn't even a shred of data that paleo, Mediterranean, keto, Atkins, put in what you want, HCG diet, anything, can do that. And in fact, you usually don't have any data. So you're really playing with fire if you're not playing with plants.
It's pretty incredible that we do have so much data on the plant-based diet, specifically around cardiovascular disease, and also that the Ornish and the Pritikin diet, which are plant-based diets, can be prescribed and used to prevent and reverse heart disease.
Agree. I talked to a patient this morning who was told he needed bypass surgery at age 52, and he found me about 2 months ago. And, you have to be very careful because some people do need bypass and some people do need stents, but way fewer than actually get it. And he's in one of the Pritikin cardiac rehab reversal programs in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and just it's incredible how much he's able to do now compared to 2 months ago. So arteries, if you take away the stumbling block, as is many parts of the body, lungs, joints, connective tissue thyroid, will respond and repair if you avoid the injury and put in some of the reparative fuel, which is generally called fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains.
Right. And so obviously it's a case by case basis and people are at different points of heart disease and heart issues. But do you typically recommend or is it possible for, I guess, in early stages, people to really reverse things primarily or only through diet versus using medication?
Yes. Dr. Esselstyn's program at the Cleveland Clinic, Caldwell Esselstyn, is diet plus, if needed, he'll use a prescription cholesterol lowering medicine to get their cholesterol down nice and low. Dr. Ornish was diet with some lifestyle, the stress management, the walking and such. And those will do it. In my office, and it's a bit unusual, but it should be more available, I use an ultrasound of the arteries to the neck called carotid arteries, and it's computerized and accurate and scientifically valid. So I routinely see people actually getting better. I can actually tell them. When I first did this, you were 60 years old and your arteries were more like a 72-year-old woman. And now you're 61 years old and your arteries are more like a 63-year-old woman. And they've come down, 9 years in 13 months kind of conversation. And most of that is taking away animal products rich in saturated fat, rich in inciting inflammation, and substituting an anti-inflammatory diet, which is a colorful, whole food, plant-based diet.
Right. So this brings up the question about, we have to talk about the paleo diet because I feel like it is so popular now. And also even the autoimmune protocol. I feel like there's such a rise in autoimmune disease now. And the autoimmune protocol is basically a very strict and even more narrow version of paleo. So yeah, what is your take on that?
Yeah, well, there's many documentaries that have been made, like What the Health last year. And there's one about the ketogenic diet, very animal-based, called The Magic Pill at the end of last year. What I'd like to do, my dream, is to get 50 top docs that actually pretty much beat each other up on social media to actually talk about the most important message to everybody, which is stop eating processed foods, stop eating vending machine, drugstore, cafeteria, gas station, unfortunately I have to say hospital cafeteria food, the middle of the grocery store boxed, hyper-processed foods made by all the big names that have all the scientists that we get terribly addicted to the box of mac and cheese for all the reasons that are in there, the salt, the sugar, the oil, the fats. And so any diet, including the paleo diet, when Dr. Lauren Cordain, who was the PhD that wrote the first popular book in the 1990s, I love that book, other than the animal products. But we're going to get rid of all the junk. People are going to feel better. And people with autoimmune disease are going to feel better. Whether it's the sugar, whether it's the processed chemicals, antibiotics, food colorings, additives, whether it's heavy emphasis on genetically modified foods, shifting to fruit and vegetables, which may have a lower content of either genetic modification or the Roundup toxic poison that's put on food, unfortunately. People will feel better. So, there actually are several different paths into starting to get better. And given my focus in cardiovascular disease, there is only one of these paths, which is the plant-based path that actually has shown to reverse heart disease. And I'm very concerned whether the paleo diet, if ever tested, could ever possibly do that with its usual heavy concentration on animal products. And there isn't just one paleo diet. Yes, like the Dr. Wall's autoimmune protocol, which does have a vegan version, and the GAPS diet, which I don't think really has a vegan version. Some of these diets used for gut health or autoimmune. They're going to be better if they take away, what a lot of Americans are eating for the majority of their calories. But then you get down to better and best, and what is going to work best for you. So we now have reasonable scientific data that whole food plant diets can diminish inflammation and reverse some of the more serious of the medical problems. I'd be happy to introduce you, Maria, to Dr. Brooke Goldner, if you haven't met her, who's a psychiatrist in Houston, but she herself developed lupus around age 16, then went on to medical school, got married, and finally her husband, a very, very well-known trainer named Thomas Tadlock, physical trainer, said, we're doing, plant diet, and we're doing it super green and super raw and super smoothies. And within a short time, her lupus, after more than 10 years, was gone. Her doctors thought she somehow had faked her lab results and everything, because, you don't think of lupus as a reversible disease, even though it can be fatal. So she teaches how you can reverse autoimmune disease. Dr. John McDougall has published on how you can reverse autoimmune disease with a whole food, starch-heavy plant diet. And, for your listeners that aren't there, we don't have to go down this path. Some of the concern is the issue of GMO, non-GMO, the concern. I don't think it's absolutely proven. But for example, wheat is not a genetically modified food. They have not yet changed the DNA of wheat to make it resistant. But what they will often do is they spray Roundup on wheat right before they harvest it. It's called a drying agent. And the wheat can stay in the field and doesn't have to be picked up immediately to avoid spoilage. So you're having a nice whole grain bread rich in Roundup, which can attack your gastrointestinal cell lining and cause you to have an autoimmune response and bacterial products in your bloodstream, which is why many people go to Europe who are gluten sensitive and can eat pasta and can eat bread and don't react, because there's much tighter rules on the use of some of these just terrible toxins. So again, kind of indirectly, some aspects of a plant diet also take care of some of the toxicity, less exposure to some of the heavy metals like mercury in fish, possibly less exposure in the fruits and vegetables to some of these toxins. But you get right down to it. It's mainly the rich infusion of vitamins and fiber and phytonutrients and polyphenols and electrolytes like magnesium or minerals like magnesium that are going to be found much more concentrated in plants than they will be in, a meat-heavy diet, and particularly a, rather average and poor quality meat-heavy diet.
I agree. I think that for many diets, the great thing they have in common is that they do cut out the processed and the junk foods. And so simply doing that does make a big difference. And then even with the paleo diet, even if it is meat heavy, there are still vegetables in it, and typically more vegetables than people were used to eating before. And those
same thing. There's great confusion what diet helps promote weight loss the most. And there are some studies that suggest a paleo-style diet might do that. But in general, you've also dropped calories per day when you've cut out donuts and bagels and a lot of rice and some of the foods that might be a little more calorie dense. So again, I really did like reading Loren Cordain's first book. Now, he didn't like butter. He thought cholesterol was very dangerous to heart arteries, things that I believe strongly are true. He's kind of modified that a bit in second edition and some public talks. But if your plate is 90% full of vegetables and you got a small piece of venison there, I'm feeling badly for the deer and I'm feeling badly for the environment. But that's a whole lot better than going to the Cheesecake Factory and having a 2,600 calorie, family dinner.
Right. Yeah. So I'm glad that you said that, because one of my questions was going to be, if you're 90% plant-based, is that enough to prevent you from ending up in your office?
And from a really high level, even just a meatless Monday can have a tremendous impact on the environment. It has a positive impact on the number of animals killed a year in any given community or country. And a 90% diet, if actually practiced by the country, would have a profound effect on the quality of our life in terms of cleanliness of the planet and kindness and such. There's only that special arena of very sick heart patients, maybe people actively trying to reverse type 2 diabetes with diet. I don't think we really, and for heart patients, I would not go 90%. I would go 100%. Although it's reported that Bill Clinton, who was influenced by Dr. Dean Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn, eats 20 meals a week that are plant-based and has a piece of fish a week. I read that years ago. I can't verify it now. I mean, he seems to be doing okay, but I wouldn't go any more than that. I'll give him one chip to have one meal a week. But these are relatively few. In my many years of cardiology practice, those people that are really on the verge of bypass, stent, heart attack, and really actively want to try and work with it with nutrition alone are just, a relatively small but very important and very wonderful group of people.
So let's talk a little bit about sugar and salt, because I feel like there are a few misconceptions about them in relation to heart disease. So let's start with sugar first. Tell us about sugar and why we should be avoiding it, because I think a lot of people, we all know that sugar is not good for us, but I think a lot of people don't realize the link between sugar and heart disease. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the difference between a diet high in cholesterol, rich in eggs, rich in butter, rich in cheese, rich in chicken, and a diet high in sugar, soda pop, is that in the actual plaque that's in heart arteries and even in brain plaque, it's cholesterol. I mean, and there's a direct relationship between the substance we're talking about in our food and the pathology that can cause heart attack, stroke, early death, erectile dysfunction, kidney failure. I mean, there's no question, and that's been known for more than 100 years from a pathology standpoint. You don't find sugar crystals in an artery that just closed and is causing a heart attack. So sugar has indirect mechanisms, depending if you're eating lots of donuts and cookies and chips and cakes rich in sugar, or unfortunately ketchup and tomato sauce and salad dressings and, the many, many places that sugar exists in our diet, it's added sugar. Eat your fruit. It's indirect because you might be prone to gain weight. And you gain weight, you might become something called insulin resistant or pre-diabetic or diabetic, or your cholesterol profile changes to higher triglycerides or lower HDL, or your C-reactive protein goes up because you got more fat around your waistline and you're inflamed. So all these different pathways can lead to what has been shown. Diets higher in added sugar have a higher risk for developing heart disease and cancer, and probably early brain disease and dementia. So that's where that unity of all experts from all sides of the aisle ought to come together. And I think, there's no cardiologist pushing sugar. Now, when there's real head-to-head studies, as best as can be done, it still is animal-saturated, fat-rich foods like chicken, eggs, and cheese that are a little bit higher on the spectrum of risk than a pastry. But pastry isn't far behind. It's just the reason America heard the message, a low-fat diet, although it's questionable that America ever actually listened and did much, but they heard it was because statistically it was more powerful predictor. But then the food industry stepped in and said, here are these beautiful low-fat cookies, and of course didn't emphasize the fact that they were so rich in added sugar. But, we've woken up to it. We've made a number of mistakes in the food world, like trans fats that took 30 years to finally realize and get out of our food system. And added sugar is another one that's, coming around, and sugar sweetened beverages. So the bottom line is when you eat a whole food plant diet, you're going to have a naturally low fat, naturally low salt, naturally low sugar diet, except on your birthday when you blow a candle out in something that probably doesn't meet that criteria. But you certainly have an advantage to have more nutrient-dense food rather than calorie-dense processed food.
Yeah. I think sometimes, though, even though when people start shifting to a healthier, whole food, plant-based diet, sometimes those vegan chocolate bars and the paleo chocolate, all that stuff kind of creeps in. And
Right.
We think because they're paleo, we think because they're vegan chocolate, that it's healthy. But you still want to be mindful of that and making sure that you're really primarily eating the whole food, plant-based stuff. And that's just a once in a while type of treat.
Exactly. And then salt. The best data that salt matters are native tribes that have a naturally low salt diet, and they're naturally low blood pressure and other illnesses that go with blood pressure, like stroke and heart attack. There is a small camp that argues for more salt in the diet, sometimes emphasizing the pink salt and the Himalayan salt and the Celtic salt. It's theory, but the vast majority of the disease is, again, a fruit, a vegetable. Most beans, you have to watch how they're canned if you're eating canned beans. Whole grains are going to be naturally low in salt. And we don't need much because there are tribes in South America who are running around eating 300-400 milligrams a day, where the U.S. limit recommended about 1,500 milligrams a day. And, one meal at a restaurant could be 5,000 milligrams a day just for one meal during the day. So, again, the answer to so many different pathways of food as a illness, food as a negative information to the body, is stay away from, the middle of the grocery store, which used to be the non-vegan world, but now in the vegan world, we got, pretty much anything under the sun that we can buy and processed, imitation something. And you have to be a little bit cognizant that read the label, added sugar, salt, milligram. It's not fun to do that. It makes shopping like chemistry, but if you're working on your health, it's important to do that 90% of the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I talk a lot about that in my book, The Real Food Grocery Guide, and showing people how to read the ingredient lists and really be like that detective in the food store.
Great book. Great book sitting in my office on the desk, by the way.
Thank you. I've read some things about salt, and so people don't want to avoid salt, like have zero salt, right? You need a little bit of salt. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. You want somewhere
Right.
just in between.
Yeah, and the solution there is fall in love with herbs and spices because they're just another way. And I think for some people, the quickest way to take their diet and improve it is don't change anything, just add herbs and spices. Because the minute you put oregano flakes or ginger powder or dried garlic or turmeric, if they're willing to try a spice that's yellow and stains your fingers, or cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, cloves. I mean, whatever they just ate, the pancakes they just ate are better. The burger they just ate's better. I mean, there's a lot of room to keep going, but that's why the Mrs. Dash and the Braggs and these other powdered flakes are just tremendous, and I use them personally all the time. I like organic spices because they're still plants and they're getting sprayed like crazy with chemicals.
Yeah, I love spices too. My spice cabinet is just overflowing. I have probably every single one you could imagine. I think they are great because they do add so much flavor, and you can take just a very simple meal and you just put some spices on it and all of a sudden it becomes a very interesting, flavorful meal. So let's talk a little bit about grains and beans, because there's also been, there's the plant paradox by Stephen Gundry, who talks about lectins and how they're problematic. And I know Dr. William Davis talks about grains and how gluten is definitely not good, but even he goes as far to say as all grains are not great for us. So what is your response to these guys?
Well, I've had the pleasure and displeasure of debating Dr. Gundry about his New York Times bestselling smash hit book, The Plant Paradox. I know Dr. William Davis. We communicate, but I've not debated him. And I'm a big objector to the paranoia that they are spreading about foods that have way more data for health than for harm. One of the bright lights in the nutrition world, your listeners may know or may not, is a Italian-born professor in Los Angeles, Dr. Walter Longo. And he is the world's leading nutrition biochemist, anti-aging expert, hardcore science, nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine level of science, of which Dr. Gundry and Dr. Davis will never be nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine. They haven't done original research. Dr. Longo has done tremendous original research. And what he says is that, nutrition matters and recommendations to the public matter. And when he talks about longevity, I mean, that's what we're really talking about, eating for the best health, eating for the best vitality, the best health span. We have a kind of like a mindset how you can approach this. He calls it the 5 pillars. One, is there any basic biochemistry that supports the recommendations? So is there, really well-developed biochemistry that eating beans triggers serious immune response and disease, as Dr. Gundry would argue? And there isn't. There's little shreds of it, and I've looked for it and I've tried to read it, but there is essentially none. And when you compare it to perhaps the basic science of meat causing inflammation, I mean, it's a fraction of the data. That's basic science. Then there is something called centenarian studies. What if people in Okinawa and people in Sardinia and people in Icaros, Greece, where they live over 100 more than any other place in the world, what are you going to find them eating? Well, a big bowl of beans would be pretty common. A whole grain bread would be pretty common. Obviously, fruits and vegetables. Some use olive oil, some don't. Some drink wine, some don't. But it doesn't hold up what either Dr. Davis or Dr. Gundry are saying in terms of actually trying to study what people who live to a healthy old age do. Now, there's always the exception of the 105-year-old woman who smoked and ate bacon all day long and would never touch a bean. But we're talking about, large databases to make reasonable, not exceptional kind of cases. There's something called randomized studies. Is there any, randomized study that people live less eating beans? It's actually the opposite. The studies, they actually not randomized. They're epidemiology from Loma Linda, the Adventist Health. And when you go through all that process, Dr. Longo actually calls these kind of diets not 5-pillar support, which you could say the whole food movement has 5 pillars of support. He calls them half-pillar supports because there's personal testimonials. I had arthritis. I adopted the plant paradox. My arthritis is better. You don't throw that away. You test it. You look for reasons to support it or deny it. but it's not even close to the data that's available for a diet that's 90% plus whole food sources. So I'm not a fan. Are there people with celiac disease? Absolutely. Are there a small percentage of people with gluten sensitivity, maybe related to Monsanto and a reaction to the Roundup? Yeah, absolutely. I think my wife is one of them because she had no problem with that. Glutinous containing foods in Europe, it certainly does here. But it's a very small percentage. It's under 10%. So for the majority of us, no, we shouldn't eat white bread. We shouldn't eat donuts. We shouldn't eat calorie empty or nutrition empty bagels. But you're talking about a big, thick, rich whole grain bread and a beautiful, well-prepared soup of beans and leeks and vegetables, go for it every time. Now, the problem I have, particularly with Dr. Gundry, is some inauthenticity, because he'll tell you in public, and he's one of the most charismatic of men. I've spent a medium amount of time with him. I eat beans. You can eat beans. Just cook them right. But in his book, it says never eat beans. I mean, come on, which way are you telling us? I don't think we have a Nobel-nominated scientist behind that concept.
Yeah, I think it's so confusing, right? Because on one hand, you read the book and it's
I don't think it's confusing. I think it's fraud. To be very frank, I think it's fraudulent. I've been at him pretty hardcore on national TV, and the references in his book are fraud. They're wrong. You can't do that with MD after your name and credentials that he has. It's sloppy. He should withdraw the book and republish it correctly. Keeps saying everywhere that he's published scientific papers describing all the results he's had. He hasn't published a paper since 2004. I like the man. I think he's way above his head, and he's making a lot of money and scaring a lot of people.
That's definitely scary. I was just telling my friend the other day that I feel like doctors are the new celebrities. They write books, they have their own programs, which is great for educating people. But I imagine that there is a pressure to come up with something new and noteworthy that no one else has done before in order to grab the headlines and grab the attention.
You could write a one-page book, eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, and then, and the rest of everything after that is just take notes on the first page, and you'd have a very authentic book. But it would be so boring, nobody would buy it.
Yeah, I know. It's all about the headlines, right? So what do you eat in a day? Take us through a day.
So I've changed. I have been plant diet. I don't even call it plant-based because it's only plants for over 40 years. I'm almost 60. It worked out pretty well so far. I carried a couple extra pounds on me a year and a half ago. And a year and a half ago was 3 meals a day. I like a glass of wine, occasionally a tequila. I mean, I was not overdoing any of this. And I stumbled into Dr. Longo, and I stumbled into scientific basis for fasting and something called the fasting mimicking diet. So I have dropped 20 pounds in the last year and a half, 5 days a month, about every 3 months, cutting my calories back, plant-based. It's a program from the University of Southern California called Prolon, and I use it with my patients because it reverses inflammation and it improves your stem cell production, and there's a lot of regenerative benefits to it. It's a program so profoundly unique and research-driven that our patent office, the U.S. Patent Office, awarded just recently the first ever patent for a therapy that can prolong healthy lifespan and regenerate tissues. And it's food. It's not stem cells. It's not a drug. It's really quite remarkable that it achieved that level of recognition. And so I eat usually 2 meals a day now. I very typically skip breakfast. We talk about that. And I always bring my lunch to work. Now, I happen to own 3 restaurants, and they're all plant-based, so I have great access to really clean and organic sourced food. But if not, it's a salad with some beans, with an olive or two, maybe with some tempeh, with some balsamic or lemon juice. It's pretty simple peasant food. And dinner will typically be at one of my restaurants in suburban Detroit, Green Space Cafe, tending towards whole food choices. We don't do any fried food or sloppy food. When I'm out, I've been a pioneer of eating out in restaurants for, so long. I'll gravitate to places that cater to plant eaters, but otherwise I'm going to the side dish and I'm going to put broccoli next to some asparagus, next to some sauteed spinach, and try and make it as healthy as possible. Do pizza without cheese and all kinds of variations. I try and stop eating by about 8 o'clock at night to get 12 hours in, or even 14 in by the morning. I don't do the 18, 20-hour kind of delayed eating, but 12, 13, 14. I love coffee in the morning. I love a glass of red wine 4 or 5 nights a week in the evening. A little bit of dark chocolate here and there. I do avoid sweets pretty hardcore. We actually won the award for the best desserts in the city of Detroit at my restaurant. I never eat them personally, but I want all the customers to. No, I mean, that's their personal decision. They come for their birthday, and on your birthday, go for it. But I would have a hard time maintaining a healthy weight if I was eating a dessert every night.
Yeah. Well, that's the you only live once part, right?
Exactly. It's your birthday. That's, celebrate.
Right. Yeah. And I love the intermittent fasting too. And the research on it is fascinating. And just, doing it personally and having clients and stuff do it. I actually wrote a great blog post on it. And you really only need the 12 to 14 hours. And it makes such a difference. Even if you're eating the same foods or the same amount of food, just giving your body that break makes such a difference. So one last question I want to ask you, which I ask of everyone that comes on the show. We talked about a lot of things, and there's so many things that we can do to live a healthier lifestyle. But if there's just one tip or one piece of advice you could leave our listeners with to how to live a happier and healthier life, what would that be?
I'd say sleep, because when you're tired, it was just a recent study that if you pull an all-nighter one night, I mean, I trained in medicine, we pulled many all-nighters. Just like food, and Dr. Ornish's research shows that whole food diets can have an impact called epigenetics and turn on genes that are healthy for blood vessels and turn off genes that promote inflammation and cancer growth. Sleep can do the same thing. In a study just done in the last 2 weeks, you skip one night of sleep and you've changed the output of your genes, all very unfavorably towards aging pathways and inflammation pathways. And, we live in a world now where you can have fun and learn something or watch something 24 hours a day from your bed on a little tiny computer. You can call it your smartphone. So it takes a plan just as much as it takes mindfulness and a plan to eat healthy 2 or 3 meals a day, 90 to 100% of the time. It takes a plan to get a dark room and a cold room. And maybe I always have around me some blue light blocking glasses that an hour and a half before bed, I'm starting to tell my brain that it's getting dark out. If I'm using an iPad or a phone, I can still block out the part of the light that activates your brain and says alert, alert, or awake. Essential oils, Epsom salt baths. I like CBD oil at night. I like magnesium at night. 7 to 8 hours sleep at night allows you during the day to get to the gym, to make better food decisions, to maintain your weight, to lower your inflammation. And if you're chronically fatigued, you may have all the knowledge in the world, but the willpower may be greater and damaged compared to the skill power, because you know it all.
Yeah, no, that's a great reminder. I think sleep is something that we, especially in the big cities where everyone's sort of hustling, bustling all the time, it's the one wellness activity people tend to push to the side a little bit. So that's a great reminder. So where can everyone find you? I know they can go visit your Green Space Cafe. You need to bring that to New York. We need more healthy options here and everywhere. But yeah, so where can everyone find you?
Yeah, the most central place is a website, drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com. And from there, I'll take you to Twitter, to Instagram, to Facebook. I'm very active on all the social media outlets. And I try and post quality stuff. I blog a lot. I have actually an article out today on the patent that was awarded for this fasting mimicking diet that's plant-based, to kind of write on new and hot topics. And I speak a lot. I'll be out at a conference in San Diego called Plantrition Project. I'll be at Plant Stock in Asheville, North Carolina. I like hanging with my peers and participate in the education process. I've written 5 books, so the last one is called The Plant-Based Solution, which next to your book might be the second most important book to read.
The second most important. Yeah. And I'll link to all of your books and all your social media and everything in the podcast show notes, which will be mariamarlowe.com/podcast. And thank you just so much for sharing all your wisdom and insight. And I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Me too. Thank you. Be well.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed and got value from this episode, I'd be so grateful if you can take just 1 minute to leave an honest review on iTunes, as that will help us reach more people and get incredible guests on the show. To say thank you, email a screenshot of your review to info@mariamarlowe.com and we'll send you a free 3-day healthy eating sugar detox meal plan. After each and every episode, I encourage you to come say hi on Instagram at Maria Marlowe, that's MariaMarlowe, or in the private Happier and Healthier podcast group on Facebook. In both of these places, we can continue the conversation about today's episode, so come and share what you think. If you want more, you can also head to mariamarlowe.com, where you'll find tons of healthy recipes, meal plans, and resources to help you live your healthiest and happiest life. Lastly, if there's someone you know who'd enjoy this podcast, make their day, and mine, and send it to them now. Until next time, don't forget, health and happiness are a choice. Our thoughts become our reality, so make sure you're thinking up a masterpiece.